Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk in two halves, I hope. First of all, I'm going to say a bit about what is shared reading. And then later, if I don't run out of time, I'm going to talk to you a bit about why I invented it or even how I came to think of it. Before we go on to shared reading, I'd really like to ask people to think about what ordinary reading is, reading as we normally think of it. I know you're not allowed to talk. I've been given some very strict instructions, but I could perhaps speak for you by saying what is actually reading. Think of the last time you read a novel or a poem. What's happening is that thoughts and feelings that have taken place in another human being are transferred by those magic little black marks on the white paper or Kindle screen into your brain. Here are two very different people. One of those people is W.E. Henley. He's the one you probably don't know. He's an English upper middle class gentleman of the 19th century who wrote some poetry. He's not a very famous poet. He's a middling poet. And the other person, as I'm sure you do know, is Nelson Mandela. And that's a picture of Nelson Mandela in his cell at Robben Island. And what these two men have in common is a poem. It's the poem Invictus, Undefeated. And it was written by William Henley. On the face of it, you couldn't get two more different human experiences. But let's not look at the face of it. Let's look a bit deeper. In his cell at Robben Island, Nelson Mandela had this poem as a touchstone and a place to go to for refuge and for hope. And if you imagine, and I'm sorry, I can't remember whether it was 27 or 28 or 29 years he was in that cell, how much hope one would need to remain whole, courageous in that situation. And one of the places he got that courage from was this poem written by the other man, with whom he has nothing in common on the surface. I'll just read it to you. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody, but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. I try to imagine Nelson Mandela reading that poem, reciting it to himself, having it in memory. I try to imagine what it would feel like to have an unconquerable soul. I try to imagine what it would feel like to have an unbowed head after 27 years. And I try to imagine what it would feel like to be unafraid. The poem helps me imagine those feelings and experiences. And if I didn't have that poem in my mental armory, if Nelson Mandela didn't have that poem in his mental armory, if Susan, in the place for women who are victims of domestic violence, did not have that poem in her mind, we would all be slightly weaker, slightly less strong, slightly less able. It matters that the words, "I am the master of my fate," should be in a human mind. And sometimes we can't generate those words out of ourselves or out of our own particular, often difficult human experience. That's why human beings evolved poetry. We did it to save ourselves. It's biological. We need it. That's what reading is. And I'm sorry to say that for very many people, that is not their experience of reading. Many people are traumatized by the very process of learning to read. So I was telling someone earlier this morning that in some wards of my home city of Liverpool, and I've no doubt here, in some of the poorest places, illiteracy, being unable to read, is at about 60% of the population. 60% of the population cannot read the words, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." That matters. In prisons, the figure is higher. Many people cannot and never will read a poem. If you didn't care about poetry, that might not matter very much because everybody's got rent to pay, drug addictions to deal with, criminal sentences to pass on, etc. Does poetry seem very important in all that? Maybe not. But it is. Because it's a piece of technology that can do things for us, the very center of our being, and make me the captain of my soul. That might make me a more able citizen. Just slightly happier or more in control. I want to say very briefly about those two lines. And I want you to imagine them in a women's community centre being read by this woman who has been the victim of domestic violence for 20 years. She can't read. Someone reads the poem to her. Do you like that? Yes. She does like it. What do you like? I like the last two lines. I'd like to read them. Those words pass through her brain. They become physically part of her. I am the master of my fate. Part of your neuropsychology now. I am the captain of my soul. That's reading. Okay, so I'm now going to talk about shared reading. Reading itself, pretty good. Shared reading, times 100. This is the first shared reading group I brought together. I'm sorry it's not a better photograph. And you can't see some of the people down this side of the table. Does it look wealthy? Do these people look rich? No. The situation, it's okay. It's okay. But you wouldn't say, it's not as lovely as this place we're in, aesthetically speaking. It doesn't look, I don't think, like a classroom. And there's a lot of human interaction happening at the moment the photograph is taken. And this lady, Rose, look at her. she's really enjoying that biscuit. And she's giving it a lot of attention. The tea and the biscuits are a big part of it. And the books are all, look, face down, because we're talking. We've been reading something in the book. It's not, I am the captain of my fate, but let's say it was. We've stopped to talk about what that might mean. And we might be talking for 20 minutes before someone will eventually say, not necessarily me, hey, come on, let's get on with the story. And then we'll start reading again. Or someone else might say, no, we need another cup of tea, because we're English, so we'd have plenty of those. So that was the first group, and I think this photograph was probably taken in about 2002. And since then, this was just me doing this thing I'd thought of doing. But since then, it's grown, and the reader now runs about, let's say 200 staff members run 200 groups a week. Some of them work in drug addiction services. Some of them work as prison guards. Some of them work in old people's homes. Some of them work as teachers. So all kinds of people, some of them volunteers, some of them doing it as their job, are meeting like this every week to share reading aloud and talking about it. It's very, very simple. But it's very profound, like lots of simple things. Good stuff happens. The lady in the red sleeves said 1 year in, I read to my little boy now, just like you read to us. The man in the tracksuit top, a single father, said to me one time, how are you going to spread this, Jane? And I said, I don't know. And he said, the thing is, you need it. You just don't know you need it. That's right. This is an answer to a problem that has not been put into words. So it was for him. Rose, the lady eating the biscuit, 10 years after this photograph was taken, graduated from university with a degree in literature. That's a long process from someone who was not a reader. I'm going to move on now to why this came about. This is where I grew up. My house was just behind this one and had already been demolished when this photograph was taken. That's the Somali club getting knocked down in the 1970s. And I spent time in the Somali club as a kid. My mum used to drink there, and I would enjoy going round. I didn't drink there till I was at least 14, I don't think. But you would go around for a dance and to be with the other people. This is also my life as a child. So this was where we lived, there. That pub, that was our home. And I grew up in pubs. And as you can see by looking at this photograph, pubs are quite good. People have a nice time. And then sometimes it goes a bit wrong and then it's not so nice. But on the whole, what I learnt growing up in pubs was that people could be really kind to each other and that people could talk to each other and would talk to each other about all kinds of things. So when we lived in the pub, there was a sailor who used to come in regularly. Big guy, can't remember his name now. And often sailed up the Baltic and learned poetry on the way and would recite it when drunk in the pub. Things like that. Great human achievements. On the other hand, I also saw a lot of fighting and people generally behaving pretty badly. Luckily for me, I had another model of human endeavour, and that was the public library, which is 100 metres away from the street you've just seen, literally round the corner. That's Windsor Street Library. And there I used to go to get out of my family. peace, quiet, dry. And there I met a whole lot of other kinds of people. Some of whom were drinkers, but many of whom were not. And here they all are. These are photographs of books I really read, aged 12 and 13 and 14. And so you can imagine, if you just think of those 2 lines of the poem, the kind of stuff that was entering my brain by reading in this way was very different than the kind of stuff that was entering my brain by being in the pub. Just as complex, maybe, but offering different models of human behavior. And I'm going to pass over a huge area of life now and say that, let's say 10, 11 years later, that reading got me to a different part of town, and that's the University of Liverpool, where I became an undergraduate in my early 20s and did an English degree. That's sort of normal-ish, I would guess, for an audience like this, but it wasn't normal for me or anybody in my family. It was quite a step out of the norm. Reading changed my life chances, my life experience, my imagination of what might become of me, and helped me become, say, a creative, relatively productive person. This is a photograph of some people I taught at university, because for 15 years I worked in the Department of Adult Education and taught literature to people like yourselves who paid money to come to the university in the evenings or on Saturdays to read works of literature. Usually in universities, that work is done by postgraduate students who stay for 2 or 3 years. But because I was older and had children, I was there, I lived there, I did it for a long time, 15 years. And over that period, I saw things happen to people who were reading together every week. So a lady in this picture was dying, and she was dying over a long period of time. And the other people in the picture and the books we read helped her die over an 8-year period. That's reading. And shared reading is like reading, but more, because you've got the people as well as the book. So I began to think to myself, how can this go to all those people in the pub? And eventually I got some money to take that idea out of the university. There they are, the first shared reading group. I recruited them on the basis of they wanted to get into reading. They were not readers, but they might want to read. 2 years into the project, I found that every single person in the photograph has a mental or physical health condition. That's why they were free in the day to come to this. Those people taught me that shared reading could be of value to people with a medical or a physical health condition, particularly people with extreme conditions. That's why I set it up. That's why it's been going this last 15 years. And I don't have time to tell you about what's going to happen in the future. But this is our home we're making in Liverpool. We've taken this building, unwanted building, from the council. And we are creating an international centre for shared reading. And I hope that I'll see some of you there in the next year or two. Thank you.